Welcome to the first episode of our series on Introduction to Artificial Intelligence for Creative Professionals. So, this series is going to be for people who want to adopt artificial intelligence in their work. Maybe you are in a creative industry where you have to constantly deal with images and videos, and maybe you've tried using things like ChatGPT or Midjourney, and you find yourself writing very long prompts that you have to keep iterating on for a very long time just to try to get fine-grained control over the results. And the results are always good, but not exactly what you want. And if that's you, and maybe you've tried using these AI tools that are kind of consumer grade and off the shelf, and it hasn't quite worked out for you, and you want to go a little bit deeper, but maybe you've been a little bit afraid of the technical side of installing complicated tools and stuff like that, then this series is going to be for you. So we're going to learn about image and video generation models that are free and open source, and how you can run them easily, and just demystifying the whole process. So if that sounds interesting, make sure to like and subscribe this video, because this is going to be the first episode of a series. And we're going to talk about the tools, how you can get set up and get started today. And in future videos, we're going to get more and more deep into using open weights or open source image and video generation AI models. To get started, we're going to be talking about this tool that you see on my screen right here. It's called ComfyUI, and this is an open source tool. It's free. You can download it and install it on your own computer, and you can run it. Issue is, though, installing this tool is a little bit complicated if you don't have some programming or just technical chops. So what we're using today is InstaSD, which allows you to launch ComfyUI very easily with one click. The other issue also is if you run it locally, you have to download all the AI models on your own computer, and you're going to be doing all the generation on your computer as well. And depending on what you're doing, if it's images, that can be doable if you have a strong machine. If you have video, you could be waiting 15-20 minutes for a few seconds of video to be generated on your local computer, and during that time you basically can do very little with your computer. So for that, it's best to run it on InstaSD, which is kind of helping you run this with one click on really powerful GPUs in the cloud. And so you don't have to worry about whether your computer is usable or not. And also, you don't have to wait a very long time between iterations, because if you're using AI within your professional work, then rapid iteration is probably what you want. So so to get started, you can go to instaSD.com, click the start button on the top right hand side, create an account, and then get started. On the workflows tab, we have a ton of various workflows. We'll get into some of these later in the program, but you can get started generating some really cool things, whether it's videos or images. But we'll get to these in good time. Once you have your account, you can actually go to instances, click the new instance button, and start from scratch. Here I'm going to just type and I'm going to download one of these Juggernaut models. These are, we'll get into what these are, but to get started, you can just do this and create. And then you can launch it on a powerful GPU. So when you launch an instance on InstaSD, you will see a screen like this where InstaSD is setting up ComfyUI for you. It's downloading all the models you need, so you don't have to do any of that on your local computer. This part takes a few seconds, so once it's up, we'll get started with going through ComfyUI. So once ComfyUI is launched, since we didn't have an existing workflow on that instance that we created, you're going to get prompted with something like this to essentially add a workflow. And again, as the series goes on, we'll talk about all of these options at various points. But for now, we're going to go to the click on this image generation. We'll walk through this workflow and talk about what each of these nodes are. And we'll actually recreate this workflow from scratch. So I just wanted to show you guys what this looks like, but to actually go through the steps that we want to cover today, we're going to delete everything and recreate this bit by bit and understand what each of these nodes do. I'm going to go ahead and delete this. And okay, so the first thing that we need when we want to construct a workflow is we need to have an image or video generation model to work with. And so the first thing that we need is a node to load the model. And in ComfyUI, that is called load checkpoint. Okay. And you can see here the model that I downloaded. Remember, I selected Juggernaut Excel, and that file is already available here on this node for me to select. In fact, it's the only one, so it's already been auto-selected. And that's it. So what this node does is it loads data from that file, and you can see that it has three output elements. It has model, which is the main image generation model. It has clip, and clip is another model that is basically knows how to associate a textual description with various elements in the image. And we'll get into that a little bit more detail later on, but you don't have to worry about that. And there's VAE, and VAE we'll talk about a little bit more. The next node that I'm going to add is something called the K-sampler. The K-sampler is the node that actually does all the hard work of using the model to generate an image. And you can see the inputs that it has. It takes the model itself. It has a positive input, a negative input, and a latent image input. Now, you can see here that even if you don't really understand detailed concepts in AI, you don't know what these things are, you can see that the outputs of one node and the inputs of the other one are actually quite intuitive to figure out what needs to connect to what. So you can see that this model, if I drag it here, it'll just connect to that. If I try to connect that model to another one of the inputs, these are not the same thing. The positive and the negative inputs, they don't take a model as their value. So you can't connect these inputs to the model. Now, within the K-sampler, there are various controls that we will talk about shortly, but let's talk about these other inputs that we have. The positive is the positive prompt, and if I drag from here to see what kind of node can I connect this to, you will get a few different options here. And the one that we want to go with, this is the standard one, is the clip text encode. Now this is a text box where I can type in something that I want or don't want in my image and have that influence the generation here. Because I connected this one to the positive input, this description is going to be something that I want. This is exactly the way you would describe the images that you want to, say, Midjourney. I can do the same thing with the negative input. And now I have a place where I can type in my positive prompt and the negative prompt. And within ComfyUI, a little element of convenience that I can have is I can actually color code these. So for the positive, I can color it green. For the negative, I can color it red. And now I can kind of get a better visual sense of what I'm dealing with here. But if you notice, this is a conditioning output that goes to the positive input of K-sampler. It's not the text, it's not string. So how does what I type here get converted into this conditioning type? Well, it actually needs to, this node uses the clip input that it has to convert the text into something else that the AI model can understand, called conditioning. And what this clip model is, it's something that takes a text, piece of text that you type, and associates that with certain element that the model understands, certain image elements that the model can understand. So when I type something here that says a beige retro TV, this will essentially, when the model is generating an image, it will make it move, it'll make that image move more towards this concept, a beige retro TV. And similarly, if I say, I don't know, a radio, it will make the model move away from this concept. So you have a positive, which is kind of the attractor, and we have the negative, which kind of repels the model from that direction. That's kind of how I think about it in my head. So because these nodes both need a clip input, you can kind of intuitively see that I can just take the clip from my checkpoint loader and connect it here to both of them. Just like that. Now the last input that we need within the, for the case sampler is a latent image. So there's something called, a concept called latent space, which might take a while for you to wrap your head around, but it's basically the way that these AI image generation models work most of the time is they will start with an image that is kind of random noise, and then they will, it's essentially a random location, you can think of it, in latent space. And then they will use this thing, that these conditioning elements, they will kind of find their way towards the destination, and we can say, so in a way you can kind of say there's a space of all possible images out there, and initially we're quite lost, but the positive prompt and the negative prompt act as a compass to arrive at our destination, and the destination would be a beige retro TV, hopefully. But there are many possible images of beige retro TVs. But you can imagine that all of them within latent space, they're all kind of clumped together in a certain region. And we're going to arrive somewhere in that region. We don't exactly know where, but it's going to be somewhere. So here I need a latent image to get started. This is kind of my initial position in the space. And here I'm going to add a node called empty latent image. By the way, you notice that when I drag something from one of these input elements, ComfyUI automatically prompts me to add any node that's compatible with that input. An alternative way that I could add a node would be to double click anywhere on the canvas and just say, type the name of the node that I want. So in this case, I want an empty latent image. I'm going to add that. I'm going to add some dimensions for the image that I want to generate. In this case, let's just go with 768. The dimensions that you choose should generally depend on the model that you downloaded. So different models will be able to generate different images or different sizes. And sometimes you will notice that if you use the wrong size with the wrong model, then you might get some distorted and poor quality results. So then I'm going to drag my latent output from this node to the latent image input of the K-sampler. And this is basically the core, simplest workflow for image generation within ComfyUI. There's one step that's missing here. So we started off with this empty latent image. This is basically our canvas. We start off somewhere random within latent space. We use our positive and negative conditioning kind of as a compass to arrive at our destination, but our destination is not going to be an image. Our destination is going to be some latent output. So you can think of it as a position in latent space, and we need to convert that back into an image. And for that, if I drag this here, you can see one of the nodes that I can use is a VAE decode. And then you can see that there's a VAE input here, and there's a VAE output on my load checkpoint. So I'm just going to connect these. And now I have an image output. So I'm going to drag this here, add a save image node, and that's it. Now with this workflow, I can generate images. So let's see what we can get. So here I'm just going to click this run button. And there you go. I got a beige retro TV. Now let's go into a bit more depth with a more complicated example. To generate this image, I actually just stole it from the Civit AI page for Juggernaut Excel, which is the model that we're using. So this is a sample image. I can open it. You can see this is a demo photo that people like, and this is the prompt that it was used to generate it, and this was the negative prompt. So I just copied these and I put it into my ComfyUI workflow that we made together. And I changed the dimensions so I can get a portrait image. And you can see that it's generating a pretty good photo right there. Let me hide the dock. So, and you notice that if I keep hitting this run button, I get something different every time. So why is that? Why is it different every time I run it? Well, that has something to do with the parameters of our K-sampler, which we're going to dig into now. The first parameter that we have here is called the seed. So remember earlier I said you have all these, essentially the images that AI can produce, they exist in this thing called latent space. Think of it as like a parallel universe, right? Our AI operates in a parallel universe, and these conditions that we give it is kind of like a compass. And it's going to start from some random place in its parallel universe, and then it's going to use the compass that we give it to arrive at the destination that we want. So what this seed determines in that metaphor is essentially the random place in that parallel universe that the AI starts from. And depending on which random place it starts from, it's going to end up in in a different place that kind of matches where our compass points to. So this, every time you change the seed, you are going to get a different result because it's going to be a different starting point and it's going to have a different endpoint, basically. So the second parameter here is called randomize. So as long as this is set on randomize, every time I hit this button, I'm going to get a different seed. And because the seed is different, I'm going to get a different image. But if I set it to fixed, then it's not going to change the seed anymore. And every time I hit the run button, nothing is going to happen because as long as the seed is the same, the output is not going to change. But if I go into the prompt and I change something from dark fantasy to, let's say, super cute, even if the seed has been fixed, now when I hit run, it is going to work again because something has changed, so our result is not going to be identical. The other parameters, steps, so you can think of steps as actually the number of steps that the model takes from the random spot that it starts from. How many steps does it take in the direction that our compass is pointing it? So here is 20. I can make it walk even further in that direction. So we can say 30. And we can see what the difference is. And let's put it an excessively high number, like 60. Remember, the seed is fixed now. So the only change that is coming up is from the one parameter that we are changing. So you can kind of see that it's basically reached an endpoint here where moving any further doesn't actually move it closer to the destination. It's only making very small changes to the image. And you can see that every time I change the steps, it takes longer because it's obviously taking more steps before it arrives at its destination. And at some point, if you set these numbers to extreme values, then you're just going to A, waste compute power, and B, start getting distortions in the image. So what you want to set this number to is usually depends on the model that you're using. Some models work with very low numbers, some models need higher numbers. In this case, you can go to the model page on Civit AI, and you can see the recommended settings right here. And you can see that steps is like between 30 and 40 is good. So if I set this to, say, yeah, let's put 35, just as a midpoint, you'll see that you'll get a good enough result without it needing to do a lot of work. Yeah, that's actually a much better result than what we had before. Now, if I set this to a very low number of steps, let's see what happens then. You'll see that this is basically just random noise, because this is essentially the random spot in that latent space that our model has been at and hasn't really arrived at where we want it. And as I gradually increase this number, you'll see that it'll start resembling the thing that we want more and more. There you go. And with the best result in this model being at around 30. So the other parameter here is CFG. You can see that this recommended CFG here is between 3 and 6. So let's experiment with that. It's set to 8 right now, so that's a little bit beyond the model recommended settings. So let's set it to 3 and see what difference it makes. Okay, that's at the low end of the recommended setting, and this is at the top end. So it just depends on the kind of vibe that you're looking for. Generally, the CFG controls how much the model adheres to what you have put on in the prompt, in the conditioning. If the value is very low, then the model tends to have more essentially freedom to be creative. If the value is very high, it's going to adhere very strongly to your prompt, but that sometimes causes, depending on the model, it'll cause some kind of unwanted distortions. So you can see with 2, it's not exactly what we would want. And the other stuff are sampler and scheduler. If we go back here, you see the sampler is recommended DPM++ 2 million SDE. These, we can get into them in a future video, but I'd recommend just following whatever the recommended settings are by the model. And you can experiment with different schedulers. Different ones will yield different results. So if the seed is kind of the random place in the latent space that we start from, and we move toward our destination with this many steps, and so where does the sampler kind of fit into this metaphor? It would be the path that we take, essentially, or maybe the vehicle that we drive. So if you use a very high number of steps, then all the samplers will eventually give you the same result. But some samplers actually require fewer steps to get there. So all of this kind of depends on the model that you're using. So this is not generally something you want to think a lot about. So if the model says use DPM++ 2 million SDE, then just use that. And that's mostly it for simple text-to-image generation with ComfyUI and basically any diffusion model. We use Stable Diffusion. If you used Flux or other open source models, it would be a very similar process. Then sometimes the nodes look a little bit different because different nodes would be compatible with different models, but it's generally the same process. As we get further into the series, then we will talk about various levels of control that you can have over the final output, so you can increasingly get exactly what you want. And I think throughout watching me build this, hopefully you picked up a few things about ComfyUI as well. It's a node-based graphical editor. If you come from something like a visual effects world, you're used to something like Nuke. This should be kind of intuitive. You build a pipeline from beginning to end, and you configure each step the way you want. And as we get into more complex workflows, then you can have more and more complicated workflows. You can have more and more nodes that contribute to that final result and build some very hefty workflows with them. Within ComfyUI, there's all kinds of little productivity hacks that you can learn as well. So one thing is like I can group my nodes together. I can name them. So if you're building a workflow that you want to share with others later, you may want to name your prompts. You can add notes. So if you share your workflow with others later, they can kind of see uh, how they can use your workflow. You can group nodes together. So I can go and add a group here, and let's resize my group. And I can put my prompts in there. There you go. I can rename it. Now I can just organize my prompts all together. And another thing that I can do, depending on how big my workflow is and how messy these kind of noodles between the nodes get, I can try to organize them in different ways. So I can go into settings. I can change the link render mode if I want them to be straight. I can do that. So the nodes kind of connect more like straight pipes. And I can organize my my workflow in any way that I want to be a little bit more compact than when it was when we were creating it. There you go. I can have a quite a compact pipeline there. And if you're using ComfyUI on InstaSD, once you've done this, you want to go down into the dock here and click Save Changes. And everything will be done the same way again when you're ready to launch it the next time. So I can go ahead and power off my instance. And I can come back to it later if I want to launch that same instance again. So that's it for now. That was the first kind of introduction to ComfyUI on InstaSD in our series. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope it kind of demystified what AI is doing. And in future episodes, we're going to get into more complex workflows and yeah, talk about how you want to build things that you might want to use in your work. So if you have particular use cases as well, if you are, let's say, if you're doing an e-commerce shop and you're doing a lot of product photography and you want to see workflows about that, or whatever it may be, if you're doing e-commerce, interior design, whatever it may be, and you want particular workflows that you want to see built in this series, let me know. Be happy to add those to our future programming. Thanks for watching, and talk to you later.